Hello and welcome back to Assetto Corsa, and in this episode we're going to be looking at yet another car from the Ferrari Pack DLC, and the car we're looking at today is an F1 car. It's a Ferrari 312/67, the successor to the 312 F1 car and the predecessor to the 312/68, so I'm sure you can understand what the numbers after the slash mean. That's the year they raced in, and of course, in typical Ferrari fashion, this is how they generally name their cars, although they seem to go in and out of this convention. But the 3 is the displacement, so it's a 3-litre engine. The 12 is the number of cylinders it has. It's a V12 engine. So I'm going to go into the specifications for this car, and then we're going to talk maybe a little bit about the history of this car, which isn't exactly the greatest of histories. It wasn't a very successful Formula 1 car at all. But, you know, maybe there's a little bit of history I might go into, and then, of course, I will go into what it's like in Assetto Corsa, because, honestly, this car is going to get a pretty high rating from me, even though it wasn't such a successful Formula 1 car. So, like I said, it's a V12 engine, 3 litres, only weighs 190 kilograms. It's naturally aspirated, so no turbochargers or anything like that. And it produces 390 brake horsepower at 10,000 RPM, which means it's about 130 bhp per litre. Not too bad for the 1960s. The chassis is a semi-monocoque fiberglass and aluminium body panel with your standard 1960s and 70s front and rear suspension. The brakes are Girling discs all around, and the rear ones are inboard to help with weight distribution and all that kind of stuff, you know, center of gravity, center of mass, all that engineering-y stuff, which I'm not going to get too much into here, because otherwise this video is going to be 45-50 minutes long if I start talking about inboard, outboard, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, the gearbox is a Ferrari Type 606 5-speed manual gearbox, which means, of course, you do have to use the clutch, which is, I always love doing in a Formula 1 car. It's just such a nice feeling. And as Formula 1 is the typical Formula 1 fashion, apart from Lotus in the 1970s, this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle. As I go off straight into the gravel, honestly, my driving will get a little bit better than this. I was just learning this car, first time in the car obviously, and you know me, I try to push it some good 80, 85 to 90% every time, even though it's the first time in the car. And this was a very interesting car to drive, and the old cars are a little bit more difficult to get a grip on, get a bit of a handle on it. But yeah, it was pretty good. The weight of this car was 548 kilograms or 1,208 pounds. So not too bad at all. There isn't too much in the way of specifications for this car, but it's quite a car. It is quite a car. I don't know so much about, I'll be honest, I don't know so much about this car, but I do know that this was, I think, the second car that was with the new regulations, because they went back to allowing 3-litre engines, and they had forced induction was allowed in certain ones, and it was just a very kit car in a sense, because the engine came out of a 275 P2 Sports Racer as the base anyway, so that means the actual engine block was out of this car, and then they had to adapt it and change it, simply because Ferrari didn't have the money or the resources nor the time to actually get a new engine built up for this, which is interesting considering, you know, it is Ferrari at the end of the day. But hey, that's, you know, that's the 1960s, that's what happens. And of course, because it was a bit of a kit engine, you know, it was a bit of a mashup, the V12 engine was so unreliable that the team originally they had to field updated V6 cars in some of the races. Now, interestingly enough, John Surtees managed to win a race, as did another driver, which I cannot pronounce his name. I mean, I know I'm going to butcher this, so anyone who's Italian watching this, I am so sorry. Ludovico Scoffiotti managed to win a race as well, and Surtees finished second behind Jack Brabham in the Drivers' Championship, and Ferrari just behind Brabham. And now this is more so down to Brabham and the Lotus being really unreliable and poorly performing, than Ferrari doing really well. But nevertheless, they tried to continue to work to up the ante for 1967, which is this car. So they managed to change the cylinder heads to 3 valves per cylinder for this year, as opposed to 2 valves at the end, with 2 for the intake. They managed to put intake trumpets were installed between camshafts, and all these nice exhausts. You can see these spaghetti exhausts that you see in the replay box behind the back of the car, these weird spaghetti exhausts. They were mounted inside the engine V, so it looks, honestly, the back of this car looks simply incredible. And that obviously increased the performance to the figure that I stated, which was 390 bhp, which before I think they were doing about 300 or just over 300. And they also managed to modify the chassis to shed over 50 kilograms, which brought it down to about that 548 kilogram mark, which was the 500 kilogram was sort of the limit that they wanted it down to. But it didn't start off too well because John Surtees left the team, and then sadly one of the drivers died from injuries at the Monaco Grand Prix. Then there were serious burns for another driver at the Belgian Grand Prix in Spa. So it was just really getting on, and it was really struggling. But 4 races into the season, a lot of the pressure was now on this driver called Chris Amon, and he managed to get 4 third-place finishes. Now the Brabham team were more consistent here. The Lotus team had these new Cosworth engines, and Ferrari had dropped to 4th in the constructor standings by this time. So it really was a struggle this year for Ferrari, and the best results it looked like they had was third-place finishes, which I think at Monza they managed to get one of those as well. But you know, that's unfortunately the story of this car. I think they only managed 3 wins in the first 4 years, from 1966 to 1970. They only had 3 wins, as I lose control of the car once again, keeping it out to the barriers as best as possible, but keeping the car rolling as not to beach the car. I don't actually know if you can beach it in Assetto Corsa, but there you go. You know, I'm still trying. So let's see exactly what would happen. Or what it's like in Assetto Corsa. What would happen if someone was driving this in Assetto Corsa? What would they feel? Well, modelling and texturing look incredible. I love that spaghetti style exhaust. It just looks really cool at the back. Obviously you can't see that in the cockpit, but in the cockpit it's very classic 1960s Ferrari. It's very classic 1960s F1 actually. You can see the suspension, you can see the wheels with the sort of goldish wheels I really like on a Ferrari, by the way. And you can see how the the tachometer is sort of rotated around, so you can see the red line a lot easier and stuff like that. Obviously I can't see a speedometer in here. You don't really need a speedometer, you just drive. It's the 1960s. You want to go as fast as you can regardless, without burning up the car, without having the engine blow, or like I just did there, without actually missing a gear. And then when you put it in gear, that violent sudden torque just gets the back of the car spinning around. The sounds of this car, well, it definitely sounds like a V12 engine, and I'll be honest, I really did like the sounds both inside and out. It did sound classic, it did sound historical, but it sounded quite accurate. It really did sound quite accurate. I could tell immediately that it was a V12 engine. There was nothing about this that didn't suggest it was a V12 engine. I could also tell immediately that it was one of those Formula 1 style engines, and honestly this sounds a lot better than the V6 engines that we have today. It's just a lot louder, there's a lot more snarling going on, a lot more backfire, a lot more popping, and in Assetto Corsa they seem to have really got that down. Again, they are missing that very slight bass note that they seem to be missing on almost every single car. I don't think that's entirely their fault, as to maybe they haven't really got to grips with with capturing the sounds and getting them into a title very well with the F mod. Obviously this is still something they need to work on. Perhaps Assetto Corsa 2 will get a better F mod system, but they've got it almost correct, so that I'm quite happy about that. The physics though, this is where this car really shines. It really is. It's brilliant. It really is brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed driving this car. I don't generally like driving old Formula 1 cars. They're a bit of a handful. You know, it's a lot of work, and depending on my seating arrangements, it does start giving, you know, you start aching, your muscles start hurting, your back starts hurting, so on and so forth. But this car, it really was a blast to drive. It wasn't easy, I'll be honest. It was not an easy car to drive, and I wasn't going 100% flat out, even when I started setting some quick laps. For example, this lap, I wasn't going 100%, but I was starting to get a feel for it. And yes, the car does understeer like crazy around the high speed corners. There's no downforce or aerodynamics as such to keep this car on the ground. It's all mechanical grip. It's a grip from the suspension pushing on the tyres and the tyres pushing into the ground. That's the only grip that you're going to have. If that suspension can't keep the tyres on the ground, the tyre does not make contact with the ground. It's not going to have that grip. It's going to start sliding. If there's too much forces, lateral G-forces, the car is going to slide around. It goes from understeer to oversteer. Admittedly, more so it has the understeer. There is a lot more understeer I felt in this car than oversteer, but it still has that, and despite that, it means that you really have to push the car further. You want to push that car towards oversteer because you know the car is going to understeer, so you want to throw it into the corners as hard as you can. The brakes were pretty good on the car, admittedly not as strong as I would have hoped, so I was being a little bit more tentative on the brakes, but they were very good generally. They were definitely good generally, and I did start finding some confidence getting into, for example, Maggots and Beckett's and letting the car slide a little bit, because it was starting to hold itself and hold its own when it was sliding very slightly. Not too much, just having a slight slide, almost like a sort of trail braking or something like that. You know, that's the sort of stuff that I was getting. So what do I give this car? Well, honestly, I've got to give this car a 9.9 out of 10. It really is quite a car to drive, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it, but I really did enjoy it. It's a very well made car. It's very nice. I highly recommend anyone who likes classic Formula 1 cars, I highly recommend they try this car out, because it really does bring out a good sense, a good feeling. It really does, and that's where I'm going to end. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to hit the like button if you like this video, subscribe to the channel for more videos on Assetto Corsa, leave a comment in the comments box below letting me know what you think, and do support me on Patreon. Link to that is in the description box below. I'm coming close to 2,000 subscribers, and there is a big announcement coming at 2,000 subscribers. And if you support me on Patreon now, you get access to my Discord, where I have been talking about it and people have been giving me feedback on that. So if you want to be able to give me feedback, please go ahead and do so. I'll see you guys next time.